And then I realized when we walked out and he just had this energy of connecting with everyone, I suddenly had this thing that you don't really get in classical music. Like, wait a minute, these people have all come here because they love him. No one's here to go, Jackman, let me inspect your piano fingering to make sure everything, it's not, people are here to have a good time.
Right.
As soon as you hear about 6 people in the front row go, we love you, Seal! You're like, look, people are here to have a good time. Just relax and play the piano. That's what we're here to do. It's not like some hideous interrogation from the Federal Bureau of like piano investigation. It's fun.
Bomb. Then bomb. Cannonball!
You love this all day.
Did you rub my lamp?
1,000 generations to the Una.
Here we go.
Look, we're like 5 episodes into this show, and I think last night might have been, or last night I stayed up till midnight, but like today's episode, I think might have been my absolute favorite, just from like everything that's coming full circle with Sam. The stuff with Isaiah Bradley is so powerful, and I guess the first place I sort of want to start is that incredible sort of like training montage where we finally get like the full-blown I guess I'm gonna say Falcon, but like the Sam Wilson theme, and everything like that. Was that, because I know we've heard that featured in the credits or whatnot, but was that the original sort of like what you designed the theme around? Was that that sequence right there? Okay,
exactly. Cool. And it's like, well, imagine what it's like for me knowing, I read some comments on YouTube and like people are excited after episode 1 and 2 and 3. Imagine what it's like knowing the whole thing. So I've been sitting here thinking, my God, just you wait till the end of 4, which of course has that dramatic ending, and a lot of development happens in episode 5, both heroic, positive, and and on the other side, Carly's tipped over fully into the sort of criminal end of her, her otherwise ambiguously somewhat commendable, aspirations, and now taking on like criminal execution. But it's particularly satisfying for me because that tune, dun, 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 bum, 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 was the Falcon motif in Captain America Winter Soldier, but he never got enough time because he always had a quick roll and some sort of move, and then it moved on. So the fact that I managed to go dun, 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 bum, 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 and keep the tune going, dun, 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 dun. And so that was satisfying knowing I had the superhero tune of him like coming into his own. But then even within the series, I couldn't really bust that out fully in episode 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 because it's a bit like X-Men First Class. I had to wait a while before I could go bum 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 bum, because they're all over the place. They're a bunch of the teenagers are just useless for ages. Sam's not useless. It's just there's a whole debate about the legacy of the Shield, the burden of the Shield. I mean, what about Isaiah? He goes, no self-respecting black man. First of all, he goes, America will never let a black man be Captain America. And even more burdensome for Sam, he goes, and no self-respecting black man should even pick it up.
Right.
So, it's been a while before Sam's had to go through a lot before he can stand tall and understand both all the negative and positive histories of the Shield. And I really commend Marvel for, it could have been such an easy show of like, the mantle is passed on and a new superhero is born. But I mean, it's really complicated. When you listen to Isaiah's story, if I was Sam, I'd be coming out of there thinking, well, maybe screw this Shield. I mean, I don't know. It's just like, would I be betraying, the legacy of slavery and mistreatment and all the, not only specifically white, notice how Isaiah says, they've been deleting our history. It's not just Isaiah. They've been deleting our history for 500 years.
Yeah.
So Sam's got all of that on his shoulders thinking, and so that's why I really like that scene where Bucky goes, listen, because Bucky was really pissed that he didn't just get on with it in episode 1. What's the big deal? Steve Rogers is gone. You're the man. Step up. And then he didn't. And Bucky wasn't happy about that, particularly when the replacement was John Walker. But then Bucky's like, okay, now I see it's actually a big deal. It's not as easy as just picking up the Shield.
Right.
I didn't understand what that meant for a black man. So I like that scene. I like how Falcon, accepts that. Goes, okay, now you get it.
Yeah.
So now we're cool. But musically speaking, it did slightly remind me of X-Men First Class in that I had this superhero theme and I sort of combined a bit of blues and Louisiana groove and non-classical stuff with sort of superhero, lofty melody, and you hear it in the end credits. But I've been like itching to get it out. But you can't. You got to follow the story. You can't ruin the show. But Sam's got to get there.
Right.
Got to, and it's taken till episode 5 for him to restart, overcoming all of the hang-ups and the histories and the burdens and his own self-doubt about whether he's the man. Not least of which we've had an alternative replacement Captain America in the meantime.
Right.
Who got dispatched? What was it? You have been given an other than honorable discharge.
I know it's the most like highbrow, just sort of like pretentious way they could have like phrased it. Yeah.
It's a posh senatorial way of saying you're done.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though, because like that whole sequence happens, and then like obviously he goes back and he starts building his own stuff to become like U.S. agent or whatever. But we still hear that Civil War theme, that plays while he's building the suit, and so I'm kind of curious because you basically do have almost 2 themes for Captain America, and at least in my mind, I've separated them into like the Winter Soldier theme, that's Steve's theme, and then in Civil War, that's like the Captain America theme, and I don't know if that's how you view it, but I think in the show you almost sort of toy around with that idea, like even to the point where it's like when Sam and Bucky are having a conversation, you'll hear like undertones of the Winter Soldier Steve theme.
Yeah.
But then like in moments when Walker is sort of like losing it, or in like those little moments, it's very much that conflicting Civil War themes.
Conflict.
Yeah,
right, that's the way. The trick to Civil War, given there were so many characters, one of the ways for me to screw up Civil War was every time a different character appears on screen, you have another melody, which means you're going to have 16 melodies, which means the whole thing's farcical.
Yeah.
Because what was way more important about Civil War was thanks to the Sokovia Accords, you end up with 2 teams.
Yeah. And
whilst there is, other heroic melodies in there, one of the prevalent themes, da na na na, da 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 da, all that stuff is it's got tension and conflict in it. And what was really and if you remember at the end of Civil War, there's an epic battle between Bucky, Cap, and Iron Man, and by that point it's become sort of mythic. It's not some of the earlier scenes in Berlin, there's like people and it's metropolitan. By the time you get to that end scene, it's like Zeus versus like Poseidon versus, it's become mythic. And so I was really pleased that beat of sort of epic conflict between the characters was able to be recapitulated, so that when John Walker, who's now fully pumped with the serum, is fighting Sam and Bucky, you get a recapitulation of that epic whatever this symbol I'm trying to think.
Right, the conflict,
I remember even the poster, isn't it like Cap on one side,
right,
like it's all head to head stuff. So that's why I got to bust out some of those thematics from Civil War, which is again, it's a bit like that Falcon idea. It's really satisfying to take something when it has, like narrative merit to it.
Yeah.
So it's not just me having fun. It's like it helps the scene, and also for people who are either familiar with music or care about music, or even if they don't consciously realize, there's a feeling of like, oh, I sort of know this feeling.
Right.
I know this is like the showdown, like the mythic showdown between, epic forces that won't budge.
Yeah.
And so that was really satisfying to be able to bring that back.
Yeah, well, and I think it definitely works for sure, just because of exactly what you just said. There is that always, like, and it's like every time there is some form of conflict, whether it's like this verbal conflict between like Walker and Bucky and Sam or whatever, there are like hints of that theme, and I think that's what makes it so effective, is because we have that legacy of it from like Civil War and everything. But I am curious because I think I watched an interview where you said that you used like some of the previous Cap themes, but like you like warped them a little bit in order to like have it feel like this uncanny valley for like Walker being Captain America.
Exactly. Well, it's horses for courses. I think early on episode 1, when it's like the ghost of Steve Rogers, you get a pretty straight up, albeit kind of distant and not like nostalgic version. But there are moments where John Walker does get a bit of Cap theme, like when he's first presented in episode 1, for example. But whilst the shape of the melody the same. Like the harmony is like way more. The treatment of it is ambiguous. So that the scene is a very different scene. When he's revealed at the end of episode 1, you know, you see Bucky's disdain. You see Sam looking like, you got to be kidding me. Yeah. And then there's something, his presentation, and like I'm subtly joining that filmmaking beat of, yes, it is a presentation and it's kind of rhetorically strong as he comes out, but you feel like that doesn't quite feel like, you know, Superman coming out, or like it doesn't have that unambiguous heroic feeling, even though it's grand, it's big, it's loud, it's rhetorical, but it's got a little seed of something that's harmonically, you know, a little bit off, and you know, that sort of thing's fun to play with as well. Yeah, for sure. Did you I don't know like how early in the stages this would have happened if it had happened, but did you have ideas for like a John Walker theme at all? And if so, like I guess what would you sort of play on for that whole idea? Because I understand like the you know, the warped Cap themes and everything. I think that's really effective, but I am curious about like him as a character and like the kind of music that would resemble him. It's a combination of two things. One, it's like a denuded DNA from the original Winter Soldier, where the harmony, like I said before, doesn't quite support it, and then it has like an increase in instead of the sort of warm patriotic chords that would, you know, denote kind of, I don't know, wisdom and like the Sentinel of Liberty. There's like an increase in some of the percussion and the tough snares and whatnot. So because his solution is aggression and power. Right. And then he has a slightly different beat, you know, like every now and then he has that little thing where he starts to snap a bit. Yeah, right. Where before Battlestar left us, you know, he'd be like trying to cool him down a bit, and you can see it's like, do you know who I am? You know, it's a bit like the Few Good Men. You know, if you rile Jack Nicholson long enough, he'll be like, you have no idea. He's got that same self-righteous, like, you guys have no idea. Get out of my way. Do what I'm. He's got a sort of an aggressive trigger, where a violent gripping of the situation, and so that had like a musical beat to it that was very much not melodic. That just felt like a little bit, you know, Mr. Joshua from Lethal Weapon. Right. Just a little unhinged. Now I can't say too much, but. All I can say is you'll have to keep watching. Okay. The finale. Because he's been in flux. You know, John Walker, he was presented as Cap. Everyone hated him. You only have to go online to see how much everyone hated him. But then everyone calmed down. You got to episode 2 and 3. It's like, okay, no, I get, you know, I sort of get where he's coming from. You sort of feel for him. Then he completely just braced himself at the end of episode 4. But you get it. You know, his guy got taken out. He lost it. He didn't have the wisdom to take a deep breath of any kind. He wasn't philosophical. He turned into like the rage monster. Then, of course, at the beginning of the episode we're talking about 5, he's stripped of, you know, all his title and, you know, relieved of duty and all the rest of it. So we're just gonna have to see what the deal is. Yeah, well, listen, I knew that going in. I was like, listen, we have one episode left and it's a finale, and a lot can happen in like an hour's worth of television, so I'm sure we'll get and something. His musical future will follow his, you know, what happens in the narrative, meaning I was playing with a slightly more angry and less wise Cap thematics and some of this unhinged stuff, and that we've sort of reached the end of that road because he's been dismissed. So his musical journey will accompany his ultimate fate, which I cannot reveal. Beautiful. Well, I'm if it is some sort of villainous, you know, fanfare, I'm very much looking forward to that. Just knowing what you did with the Magneto theme and like how that was a pretty cool theme. That never got used because I only did the First Class. I don't think it ever came back. That thing. That was pretty cool. Yeah, I was always so bummed about that because it was like that was. I mean, you had like the rock elements of like the 60s and stuff like that, and then it was just. Well, I think, you know, if some other composer's doing an X-Men film, you can't imagine me ringing, oi, Hans, So listen, are you gonna? It's like, well, no. Let me. I want to do my one. So
Yeah, right. No, I definitely get it, but it was definitely I mean, it was a bummer that we never got to hear it again. But I get what you're sort of saying. It's like once he becomes like once these characters become that fully formed villain, then it's like
exactly.
you lay on the theme. Well, and it's the same thing with Sam too, because that
either
was
way.
like I mean, that's the first time we're hearing Sam and his theme and everything, and it works so much better that way. But going back to the Sam theme, one of the things that I really liked about it was how you really, I mean, it just speaks to Sam as a person as a whole, right? Like which any good theme should do, but it's like it starts really grounded with the guitars and everything, and then it's sort of like it starts like soaring like his like Falcon alter ego with like the strings and everything like that, and it's just I don't know, it's one of those really effective music cues that just encapsulates the character. And I think throughout the MCU, the ones that stick with me the most are the ones that embody both the superhero and like the person behind the mask.
That's a really good point, actually. Well, maybe well, I've got no excuse. I guess I've been doing it for a while. When was Kick-Ass? About 10 years ago. I guess I'm getting a little bit better over time, hopefully not getting worse. I mean, I've had some practice, so at least I'm, the whole, I guess, challenge, particularly the one you just pointed out, which I think is really perceptive. That okay, great. So you could just have, a heroic theme, but that's speaking to half the story, and the story when he's got his suit on and when he's in that mode. But one of the whole points about this show is he hasn't really got there till episode 5, and you've seen a lot of what it takes to get there. And so he didn't come out of nowhere. We've seen Louisiana, we've seen his friends, we've seen the arguments with his sister, we've seen the problem with the boat, we've seen how the bank mysteriously won't give him a loan, and we've seen the relationship with Bucky, which has been sort of a little bit fractious, and then finally growing up a bit and having a proper emotionally intelligent conversation where Falcon displays just the sort of wisdom when he talks to Bucky about you haven't been making amends, you've been avenging. He displays some of the sort of philosophical wisdom that is precisely what John Walker was lacking and what is needed in a true Captain America context. So it is tricky, because it sounds like if you were a producer, it sounds like one of those impossible recipes of like, hey, so can you do me a favor? Can you make a theme, right? But it has to sound like it fits into the Marvel universe. So don't do anything too crazy. It's got to be heroic. Like make sure it's got like some mojo, right? Make sure it's got some groove. And if there's any way you could sort of set it in Louisiana, but don't make it like too Louisiana. Keep it sort of heroic all at the same time. Kind of mix that all together and like send it to me on Friday. That would be awesome. Thank you. It sounds like, oh shit.
It's like, where do I even start, right?
Yeah, and it is the sort of thing that could go horribly wrong if you don't. But I spent a bit, I didn't do it in 5 minutes.
Right,
I spent you spend a while making sure the notes of the theme are right. You spend a bit of time on the orchestration, then you spend a bit of time leaving that to one side, getting a groove going, getting a feel going, figuring out what the guitars are doing. That particular track, because it had so much DNA significance, exactly like you're saying, on the grounded side and on the superhero side,
right?
Like, you devote a lot of time to it, because once you've got that, once you bake that cake, you can make other cakes. So you got to make damn sure that cake is the right cake to start with, because then it becomes easier when you start taking slices out of it and putting it across the movie. So I'd love to say that I like walked into the studio on a Monday morning and by like Monday evening it was nailed. You should have heard the early iterations,
Right.
But it was worth spending time on, because I'm particularly proud. The thing that you've mentioned is the thing I'm proud of. You can hear Louisiana, you can hear the guitars, you can hear the non-classical, like, for want of a better word, the symphonic heritage. That like the non-side of that is strong, and then as the theme comes in and the horns come in, you get the other side, and they don't seem to be in conflict, and it feels like that's what Sam's all about. He's not some posh privileged guy who waltzes out of some Ivy League scenario and straight into the suit or whatever. And so you need, if there's some way to get as much as you can in the music that reflects the journey he's had to make, then even if you're not like, you know, being analytical or you're not a musicologist, you just listen to it and you somehow think, oh yeah, no, that feels right.
Yeah,
that feels like what I'm looking. That feels like the story I'm watching.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that fusion thing that, like, I mean, you do so well, which is really like, you know, your background in both worlds, right? Your background in electronic and like experimental stuff, and then your classical background, and it's like now, and this is like a perfect example where you sort of like blend the two together, and you get like this, you know, very versatile encapsulation of Sam Wilson, you know?
Yeah, well, you got to get it right though, because you know it's a bit like cooking. If you mix up, you know, it's just something you have to spend a bit of time on, so you don't get the, you know, especially with all the band stuff, it's got to feel legit, you know. If you're in a hurry, you end up with like film composer guitar sound and like film composer like pretty crummy, you know, drum sound. So you know, it's giving it the respect and spending the time, and then I think the reason it came out all right in the end is because the intention was honest and it should work. Right. You know what I mean? It wasn't like some pretentious experiment of like, oh, let's have lobster with raspberries just for the hell of it. You know what I mean? It was like, Sam, it's legit. Sam, that's his thing. He comes from Louisiana. His background is not the same as Steve Rogers. That should be something you can hear. And there's nothing wrong with coming out of the orchestra and hearing guitars and drums and having like a slightly soul kind of funk groove or a rock groove or whatever. It's you know, it's intellectually honest. So as long as you like execute it properly and spend time on it, it should work, because it's not been conceived as a sort of, you know, pretentious whim. It's the actual ideas of the show turned into music. Yeah,
for sure. Well, and I am curious, because when you originally like created the motif for Sam and Falcon, like did you even have like a full theme for him like planned?
No. I used to have, when I was working on cues for Winter Soldier, it would go like dun 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 bum bum bum, and then the piece would move on, and I'd just like go outside and I was just relaxing for a bit, and then I'd be humming dun 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 dun. So, yeah, you know what? One day, I mean, I don't need it. And I've got so much to do on Winter Soldier. I can't waste like 3 days finishing this theme and orchestrating and everything. But it's like, I swear to God, what a shame. You know, he only got that one phrase. But you know, you never know. One day I might get back to it. And I did. So that was great.
Yeah. Now in the actual like sort of orchestration of that piece and everything, did you like play the guitar and everything like that for it, or did you? Okay.
I played it all in on a keyboard.
Okay.
And my version on the keyboard goes like and it doesn't sound amazing, despite, you know, a bit of engineering.
Right.
And then I rung my very good friend and composer and brilliant guitar player, Alex Belcher, and go, Alex, I've got, you're not going to have to kill yourself. It's performance only. I've written all the parts. They sound terrible because it's samples. Can you come in and bring your swagger and because you know, guitar sound is really important. He could have played those exact notes, and with slightly the wrong, slightly shreddy, you know, sound, it could have got a bit big hair 80s Kiss.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He had a masterful. He spent a bit of time selecting his weapon, meaning, you know, guitar, and even then, you know, the sound. It's a real art form, fiddling around to get a tone and a sound. And you know, whatever it was, 2 days later, the guitar parts come back from Alex. So like, oh, now I can mute my guide tracks, you know, that were going ding, 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 do, 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 do. And now you hear his fantastic, and it's a combination. His playing, he's got great feel in the playing, but it's also his, you know, he's got a great ear for getting a good sound, because, you know, he's really knowledgeable on, you know, the whole history of it, all sorts of guitar-based American rock and blues and all the rest of it. But I don't want to go on too much about his guitar playing, because he's actually, you know, he's a composer. He'd probably,
right.
Henry, why did you keep banging on me about, you know, as a guitar player? But, you know, he's just got a lot of skills. So, I was really happy that he played all those guitars.
I kind of want to shift away from Sam, moving into Bucky, because I think Bucky's an interesting character throughout this series, where it's like you have to represent, you know, almost similar to what we were talking about with Sam. You have to represent that civilian version of him, and then you have to represent like sort of the violent, you know, Winter Soldier side of him, which we don't always see, but like it's always like, it always feels like it's just on the cusp of coming out again.
And there are some outbursts where you really do, you know, when they were with Zemo. before they saw Shelby. I'm thinking of Selby. Don't worry. I was about to give you like a snooker reference. There's a famous snooker player called, and then I realized absolutely no one listening to this would even know what snooker is. Right. But yeah, that whole scene in the bar. You know, there are a couple of, you know, basically anytime he's triggered and just sort of gets pretty close to going back to those Winter Soldier, you know, you'll hear some of those textures and the kind of robotic noises and the crazy scream. But you're right, the majority of it now is a different sort of struggling civilian Bucky trying to, you know, make amends.
Yeah, well, and I'm curious, like, because I think a lot of this show, what you do so interestingly is you take fragments of like their overall theme, and then you toy around with those specific fragments in order to like create new music that represents like the struggle they're going through right now. And with Bucky, I think, if I remember correctly, there's like a string section in the Winter Soldier, and like the full blown, you know, industrial whatever, like the Winter Soldier like suite. There's like a small melodic section, and I don't know. Did you use that to really like? Okay.
That's true. It's very. You'd have to be sort of a musicologist to hear it. Like, firstly, the string line, which appears in like the last 30 seconds of the Winter Soldier suite, is completely surrounded by screaming and banging and crazy noises and whatnot. But there's a little melodic shape in there, which in the original is in this very crazy scale that sounds stressful and anarchic and disturbing. But that melodic shape was taken from there, and the scale was changed into a diatonic scale. So it's a lot more grounded. It doesn't feel of another world and crazy and disturbing. But yeah, it was a bit like if you were working in like virology or something, like getting like a syringe and nicking like part of the DNA of something, putting it in a petri dish, and then modifying it and then turning it into something that's a long way from the aggressive and disturbing thing it came from. But it actually does share musicological DNA with this melodic line, which I thought was it wasn't just a pretentious intellectual conceit. I think there's something satisfying about that, because that's what's happening for real. And then all the instrumentation changed, all that banging and crashing and screaming and wailing and all that's gone. And the civilian Bucky there's quite a lot of featured piano and strings. It's a lot more humane. And I can't say too much, but there's a Bucky piece upcoming. There's a Bucky piece upcoming in episode 6, and so, you know, like all these characters that I can't give everything away, they're reaching their denouement as a character. So of course, musically, it's therefore required to match that. So I'm going to say no more, other than if you're interested in the Bucky civilian theme, as you would expect, you'll hear a denouement of that.
Okay, that's really exciting, because I honestly, which, you know, I guess foolishly in my mind, I'm like, oh, okay, you know, it's the penultimate episode, like everything that's going to be is sort of going to be here, and we'll get the resolution in the finale, probably some big action sequence. But
you may not do. I can neither confirm nor deny anything.
Yeah, but it's like, it's interesting because we will hopefully get these like fully formed you know, new musical identities for these characters, along with like their new I guess like alter egos, their superhero alter egos, if you will. That's really exciting for me, just to see the progress of these characters, sort of like musically at least. Which I guess another one that you sort of had to tap back into again was Zemo, and that sort of you know, more traditional orchestral theme, the manipulative I guess motif.
It's a spidery kind of a string theme. Yeah, that was fun to get back into.
Yeah, so what were some of the ways that you wanted to, you know, push and utilize that theme that maybe you didn't get an opportunity to in Civil War?
Well, to be fair, Zemo got quite an outing in Civil War, but you know, he was one of an ensemble of characters, but he was the main sort of catalyst. Well, I mean, they were sort of tearing each other apart, having not agreed on whether they should or shouldn't sign those accords. But he was definitely the sort of puppeteer in there. So, but it's a slightly different Zemo, because don't forget, when we first meet Zemo in Civil War, he's fully unpleasant.
Yeah.
The first scene, you know, it's not exactly waterboarding, but you know, some guy's like upside down, like drowned, and there's a darker, more barbaric edge to the introduction of Zemo in Civil War, as indeed there should be. There's a bit more. I mean, you're a bit on edge with Zemo because you never quite know what his agenda is. But we're able more to enjoy. You know, he's a baron. He's got a lot of cool cars. He's got a cool butler who's, you know, like 80 something. He's got project, and he's now part of the kind of Three Musketeers. So it's this balancing game with the Zemo theme. You still get some of that ambiguous, spidery manipulation, but without quite such the violent, dark intensity that accompanied him in Civil War. But a lot of those thematics are the same, and there's this funny kind of bell sound that I got to use again, and the spidery string theme. It's all in there, and it just helps that beat of uncertainty, because there are moments when it's like, hey, Zemo to the rescue, this is cool, but you're always thinking, yeah, but I don't know, what's he going to do next? Is he going to bail them out? Or is that you never quite know? It's like having a snake on your side. It's cool because he's poisonous, and if it's a well-trained snake, I guess it's cool, but what happens if the snake suddenly decides to like munch you? Then you could be screwed.
I mean, that's the thing that I've really come to like about Zemo in this series, is that he's like, out of every single character in there in the show, he is the true anti-hero, because he doesn't, like, his beliefs don't falter. He's like steadfast in what he's going to do, and like, I don't know, I think it's like, it's very rare that you see a character that just like maintains that strong distinct belief no matter what's going on. I mean, he doesn't you know, take sides or select who he's going to target. It's like it's either
a very good point.
Yeah,
because he's not the sort of slightly two-dimensional villain only ever has one thing in mind, which is global domination.
Right.
And well, I suppose Thanos was a bit more nuanced. His thing was balance. Okay,
right.
He's going to have to be brutal. But Zemo's actually got a quite coherent philosophical outlook, which, if you are of like a skeptical or conservative with a small c philosophical disposition, he's actually right. Meaning, his thing is like, look, I realize the Avengers have good intentions, but he's always giving these philosophical speeches about, like, it doesn't matter how good your intentions are. As soon as you erect people onto these platforms of, like, you know, moral unapproachability, like Captain America, there's no organism, an entity on Earth that can ultimately live up to it. And eventually, you know, there'll be complacency, there'll be arrogance, there'll be... His whole thing is that the whole worship and desire to have superheroes in the first place is ultimately philosophically doomed to failure, because they're never going to have the wisdom to conduct themselves. You know, that's what the Sokovia Accords are about. You know, it's actually, I enjoy all that. Obviously, superhero movies are not like profound works of philosophy, but to be fair, for movies like Civil War, if you want to get past some of the action and whatnot, there is some underlying thoughtful content, which is, it is quite handy having these extended characters whose powers far exceed a lot of the US military or any human capability. But then on the other hand, like, what are they? An arm of the US government? Are they like an offshoot of the UN? Like, to who? Like, what, democratic or not? Or not? You know, that's what that whole argument is about. And Zemo, obviously, he's done some terrible things, but a bit like Carly, if you just look at his philosophy on paper, it's not a terrible philosophy, which is that we should be really careful about elevating people to ridiculous status when they're not accountable to anyone. So don't get surprised when eventually it goes horribly wrong. It's a bit like every cult you've ever seen. It's like, oh look, the cult begins and everything's fine and everyone's sharing and everyone's working on the farm together. And like, inevitably with all of those cults, 4 years down the line, the leader has like 16 wives. There's like barbed wire everywhere. They've all got guns, and there's a mass suicide like on its way. It's the same arc every time. And that's Zemo's argument. He's just saying there's a fundamental lack of wisdom in expecting that, you know, that a group of Avengers will have like some eternal wisdom of Solomon, when eventually they'll just start failing, like more like the Greek gods and the Roman gods, who have like fights and disagreements and jealousies, not like, you know, the sort of Christian God who's supposed to be some perfect omniscient creature. So you're right, he is a really interesting character, but the way he goes about things is you never know his intentions, and he's very sneaky and he's quite manipulative, and that's why that theme that has quite an odd scale to it, and it's quite kind of slithery.
Yeah.
It's not an evil theme, but you just can't quite settle while you're watching him, and that's its purpose, to keep you not quite comfortable, that you are confident that you know what his agenda is. It could be something that you haven't anticipated.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's what I completely agree. It's why it's so effective. But in a similar way, the Flag Smashers like have this other, the music for them as well is sort of like ambiguous to an extent. Like it feels like there's just a lot of I'm trying to find the right way to phrase it, but there is like some light buried within.
Yeah, no, you're right.
The noise,
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's the same thing. It's a duality thing. On the one hand, the Flag Smashers' musical identity has a lot of gnarly, slightly anarchic. They're all young. They're fanatical, young, idealistic, pretty cool bunch of characters. So there's some distorted and slightly I don't know what the word is. It's not dystopian. It's slightly dystopian. There's some of that dystopian soundscape, but then there's also this series of notes that kind of are a bit aspirational and reaching and have like a more emotional connection to them, which sort of represents the fact, they're not just a bunch of mindless vandals. They have these ideals, and they've got some legitimate grievances. And it's just, the question is, do you agree with how they're going about it?
Right.
So the Flag Smasher musical identity has that layer of dystopian noise, and also this melodic arch, and both of those things come into play, depending on the scene.
Right.
And it's another good example of the good writing, a bit like Zemo, a bit like John Walker. You can't just dismiss the Flag Smashers out of hand without having to face certain things, like the sort of reintegration policy. It's like, well, they're not that evil. They're trying to steal food and medicines that should have been distributed, and then distributing. I mean, if you were someone who needed those medicines, you'd be like, I love bring it on.
Well, that's the thing that I have found so fascinating about them, is just like the progression of them as an organization, because or as these revolutionaries, because they are ultimately someone who I do personally feel, I'm like, watching this, I'm like, they're kind of right, like their belief system and everything, and how they've sort of been discarded, I feel like they're totally justified in wanting to like rise up and all of that. But you're right, it comes down to like how they're acting.
Exactly.
And such, right? Which I have to imagine that's what gives it, like, that's what makes for such interesting material to sort of mine for like creating music for a group.
Well, exactly, because we're back to all these dualities, like Sam, the Louisiana thing, the traditional orchestration for superheroes, Flag Smashers, gnarly electronic dystopian kind of fragmented noise meets reaching sort of slightly idealistic theme. It's good, the more the writing has duality, either in the characters or in the story, the more, you can do that in the music. And far from being, I guess the cliche, all those like producer cliches when you want to take the piss out of executives, where it's like, it needs to be hot but cold, it's got to be loud, but quiet. It's the sort of satire of the idiotic producer who everyone's like mocking.
Right.
But actually, it's unfair, because when you get into sort of slightly more artistic vein, if you say to someone, we need a piece that's heroic, and like more heroic, and just seriously heroic, that is not as interesting as, we need something that's heroic, it's got to be grounded in Louisiana, or we need something dystopian that represents like a sort of not mindless, but like aggressive fanaticism, but it also has to have legitimate idealism and some sort of aspect to it that could feel like, this feels like, so there's light and dark happening at the same time. All of that is good. I mean, if someone told me, hey, can you write a piece of music, it's got to be green and yellow, okay, fine, they can go swivel. But there's nothing wrong with saying, can it be, it's actually more artistically satisfying when you're presented with characters and situations that aren't just like, he's the most evil villain in the world and is bent on global domination, so all we want is like a massive arch villain, which is, by the way, which is also very fun
Right.
But it is nice when you have, it's like, how do you combine these things? And then it becomes more subtle, because depending on which part of the show and what's being highlighted, you lean on different bits of DNA. When things are toughening up, she's starting to go, listen, we got to amplify our techniques. You lean on the gnarliness and some of that crunching groove and all the dystopian sounds. When it's like a more idealistic conversation about why are we doing what we're doing, that backs off, and you lean on the other part of the DNA. You know what I mean? It means that you've got a few things in the cupboard, and you can pull more on one side of the DNA or the other.
Oh, I'm just out of curiosity. Obviously, this isn't the first time you've worked with Kevin Feige, and talking about what that working relationship is like with the producers. How does Kevin Feige approach going in and giving you like notes or instructions on composition?
He is at some stratospheric level of creative management that unless he would not be. He watches the whole thing as a sort of Kevin's perfectly capable of breaking things down, but in terms of he has this critical role that no one else really could do in terms of think how much detail I know too much about, having been in the woods. So his perspective on music is fascinating and great, because he will intervene only in this sort of epic storytelling, overarching narrative sense. And, he's got like a spidey sense for I had this one note here, and it's never trivial or poxy or some surface, or this sound was a bit loud, or could you just push the snares back a bit. It will only ever be a Kevin interception to do with something that's of a more narrative and fundamental nature, which is, I mean, I envy him as perspective, but it's I guess that's why he's the top dog, you know what I mean? Because he's able to have that with anything. He's got having to think about where the show's going, where it's come from, the legacy of the characters, how everything's interacting. His listen down to the show is so different to mine. So whilst he's unlikely to start giving me detailed descriptions of what the violas are up to, but if we were to have a discussion, it would be about the I'll give you a good example. In episode 4, that is a major tonal commitment to something catastrophic. I mean, the last shot you see is Cap with the shield covered in blood. And it's just a disaster. I mean, in terms of if you start from the 50s Captain America Sentinel of Liberty and cut to John Walker having sort of beheaded someone with a shield with everyone filming it's just that, how the hell did we get here? And it was Kevin's call to go, Henry, I love that that whole MOE thing, but I think in the aftermath of what's just happened, I think that we need to take a different route musically at the end. And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. It's like big picture realizations, which he's great. He'll never miss. You'll never get if there's something big picture wrong, it'll never get past Kevin. I get the feeling, knowing Kevin as I do, that sometimes he spotted something and he's very gracious. He doesn't go steaming and straight. He'll kind of let it settle and let people fix and push things around a bit, and then be quite patient until going, okay, so my one thing is X. He's very he's so gracious. So once you're in a creative working situation with Kevin, there's an awful lot of respect there, especially if you worked with him before. And if anything, I think sometimes he can be gracious, such that I feel like I've been in meetings with him before, and it's like, oh yeah, no, this is working, and I look at Kevin and I feel like Kevin's got something he, and it's the sort of thing that he might bring up a week later, and I go, oh, Kevin, you would, I feel like, and then he'll go, I just wonder, when we hit that shot of Wakanda, maybe it should be a bit tougher sounding than it, and and you listen to it again and you kind of hear it through his, like, what, in the context of how we get to this shot, the man's right, let's do another pass at that and hit it even, button it even more like the sort of end of movie, Easter egg. But what I'm saying is, he's not like, oi, why isn't that wasn't that bigger at the end?
Yeah. That's great.
He's meaning, I think he like sometimes he'll know something ahead of when he might say it. So I've got into the habit every now and then of I've got this like spidey sense with him of like I can feel there's a piece of wisdom that he's got.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask for it now.
Right, yeah, it's sort of prolonging it.
Yeah, because he's never wrong. That's the thing.
Right.
Once you work with people, I tell you who's like that as well as Joe and Anthony Russo.
Right.
The it's not always true in your whole career, especially when you start out, and that you work with people who every time they say something, they're right. I mean, no one's right all the time. But once you are lucky enough to work with like Joe and Anthony Russo and Kevin, these sort of people, when they have these like spidey instincts about things, it's not something you should be like, oh man, I got to change it. You should look at it like a gift. This guy is operating at a different level to you, in a different level of understanding. And so if you can see some little twinkle in his eye where you can sense he's got like some nugget of wisdom that's going to help you in this process, for God's sake, grab it and then execute it. And then, but once you've done that, you're like, oh wow, no, that is better.
Yeah, so I have to imagine when you're doing these meetings, you're just glued to them. You're like, okay, I got to see their reaction, and I need to know whether or not I'm gonna pause or not. Right?
Yeah. No, you can usually tell, but the real privilege is that when people have suggestions and whatnot, the nightmare scenario is people have no idea what they're talking about. They have conflict. Even worse is like directors and producers have like conflicting ideas. Yeah, and there's just a political nightmare. So the real privilege is, when you work with like Kari, the director, Jeff Ford's done just look up Jeff Ford in terms of his knowledge of the Marvel, Kari jumped on this thing and it was brilliant. She gave it a whole thing actually that we haven't seen in Marvel, precisely because she hasn't done. So the combination of Kari as the director and Jeff, who's, what's the word? Curated so much of this Marvel stuff, and then throw in the producers and Kevin and whatnot. It's like if anyone's got an idea or a suggestion, your best way of looking at it is a gift, because these guys seriously know what they're talking about.
I mean, the resume is the past like 20 plus movies. I mean, like that's all you need.
Yeah, Kevin, what do you know? It's like, he's only the person who think how many. The basic proposition of, I wonder if it would be possible to set up some franchise that just is incredibly successful, hugely entertaining, works all over the world, and just keeps going. It's like, well, duh, that would be great. I mean, Harry Potter ran out of books. Narnia, they tried, it sort of fizzled out. Star Wars, they've kept it going. But I mean, who Bond's been going forever, but it's not quite the same thing. It's not like a shared universe. I think he's nailed. I don't think anything is comparable really to, not only in the amount of movies that have been, now it's spinning into streaming, but also the complexity of the expanding world, I think exceeds the Star Wars universe, and the tying in, of plot points within movies. That is, I mean, you could sit in a room and dream up that in the late 80s. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could just nail all this and just make it work? It's like, yeah, but actually succeeding in doing it is a bit of a one in a something pretty high.
I have a friend who's a big SEAL fan, and he wanted me to ask you about just sort of the process of creating Togetherland, and then ultimately why it was never released.
Oh, well, you know what? I should probably talk to Sia before I say too much about that. Other than there was some really cool music.
Yeah.
I think I haven't spoken to him for ages, but he has got a particular, I'd want to be respectful to him, because in his musical journey, I think he got upset that it didn't get released, and he's definitely put it a bit like Bucky or something. It's in a cupboard for him that he wants to keep locked, which I totally understand.
Yeah.
But between me and you, there was some really cool, I don't think it was a perfect album or anything. I don't think I'd say oh my God, it's the greatest album ever made, and it never saw the light of day. But there was some fantastic stuff on there. I wouldn't say all of it was fantastic, but there was some really cool stuff. I think I'm not, I spend so much time in film music,
right,
that I'm not au fait with his fan base and everything. I think there has been quite a lot of fan chat along the lines of, hey, can we hear some of that Togetherland stuff. It's probably receded now because it was so long ago. But I think he was pretty strong on like, stop asking me. I'm never gonna play that. So I don't think it would be my place to go, hey, I've got all the tracks somewhere. I don't know if I even have. They're probably lying around on some format that wouldn't even play back anymore.
Right. That's very true. Yeah.
If he, the only thing I would say is that he's perfectly entitled to, have that feeling about it and doesn't want. If there's material he doesn't want his fans to hear, that's absolutely his business. But purely from a musical point of view, I remember a number, 3, 4, or 5 tracks that were really cool, really interesting. I thought he sounded amazing. I thought he had some interesting lyrics. There were some good songs. Between us, we probably weren't the perfect. I can't remember how old I was then. But someone like Trevor Horn was, a god of record production if you look at all his history and whatnot. So between us, we probably had sufficient naiveties for it not to be as nailed as a Trevor Horn production. But that being said, there was some really cool stuff on there, and if he ever changed his mind and felt like there was stuff, I feel like maybe some of the reason he doesn't want it heard is it's probably a bit traumatic for him on a personal level, not necessarily that like, oh, this piece of music's terrible and I don't want people to hear it, but the whole experience is one that he quite legitimately goes, to be, I don't want to go back to, spending all that time on a process and then having to lock it away and then start something else. So I would think that some of it is emotional as well. I'm only speculating. You'd have to ask him.
Yeah, right.
Because from a purely musical point of view, there was definitely some stuff in there that was actually pretty interesting and pretty good. Yeah, but then he may disagree. He may go, "Oh, I just hate all of it."
Yeah, which is right. Totally understandable and everything. Yeah. And maybe this is just ignorance on my part, but was the reason it was never released, was that like a huge debacle with I guess the distributor? I think it was Warner Music, but was it?
To be honest, I actually don't. This sounds ridiculous, but I don't know. Going back to sort of being a bit naive, when I was making music with Seal 2000 and when was that? 2000 was that 21? So yeah, I just finished the album that we were making and split. I think I was 29 or something. I was just, I can't remember. I probably went to like Thailand and sat on a beach and hung out in Koh Phangan. Everything that happened after that was like way past my pay grade.
Sure.
We were hanging out. We were having a really cool time, or so I thought, and we made some really cool music. Whatever then transpired after that was I wasn't actually privy to. It was just like, okay, so this thing that we did apparently is now not cool, and other things are now happening. And it's not for me to argue with that. I was like a guy who was hired to work on this stuff, and then extremely important people decided not to move forward with it. And as soon as Seal decided to agree with that, it's got nothing to do with me. It's his. It's his. But I mean, I was really disappointed, obviously, because I thought a lot of that music was cool, but it's not my career. So if it was deemed to be not sensible. So I honestly don't know. I don't know if it was considered like not commercial enough, or just not finished enough, or not polished enough. But obviously someone didn't think it was right, because it's not like they tweaked it. I mean, it was just the whole thing was locked in a vault, and off he went to do something else. So yeah, I honestly don't know. I have a feeling that it's a combination of like, it's not like I'd produced loads of records, and nor did Seal. So it's a combination of some naivety about the music itself, that being the reason that Seal since that time didn't want anyone to hear it. Right. But probably, it's probably a more, it's a more traumatic experience for him than me, for example. It's his next album. He's a huge artist. So he probably just doesn't want to revisit that whole time. So when people go, hey, can you play this? I mean, God forbid, what happens if he goes, come on then, let's get it out, and everyone goes, wow, this is great. Why? I mean, that would be even more painful. Of like, right.
It's like he's like, well, I was right all along. It's not even my fault.
We were like nearly there. I'm not like I say, you don't want to be arrogant about it. There's probably a reason why people didn't go, oh, this is perfect. It's the finished article. But I imagine from his point of view, it's risky either way. Either going back to that time and listening to that music is just painful, because it's just this whole episode that went on forever, and he had to start a new album,
right?
And he doesn't like it, and then a potentially worse revelation would be that, oh, actually it was really good, and that would be sort of annoying and painful. Why not leave it in the cupboard? I'm only speculating. You'd have to ask him, but the man is a total gentleman. I mean, and we actually had a great time. on that music. So yeah, to be honest with you, it's as much as a mystery to me. You'd have to, the only person who would know the real answer would be Seal and the guys at Warner's. I was a somewhat inexperienced guy, probably on a beach, drinking, pina colada by the time it was deemed to be not up to scratch, or not the thing Seal should be releasing after his the album before that.
I'm curious about that sort of like collaborative relationship between the two of you, because I think I listened to an interview or something where you said that he actually like invited you up on stage to play Kiss from a Rose or something like that.
God, yeah.
So I was just, obviously you had to have been on some level where it was like, well, let's just like, jam in front of people,
Oh, well, he was, it was great actually, because I like being a composer and I don't really like performing live. I don't know, I just got put off maybe when I went to all these like classical colleges and whatnot. But
yeah,
and he's a phenomenal performer. Most normal human beings, what happens is you practice and you practice and you practice and you get really good, and then when the heat is on, expect some sort of diminution in the performance due to the red light syndrome. The lights are on,
right.
blah blah blah. A really good performance like Seal, they're the opposite. What happens is they're already great in rehearsal, and the opposite happens. As soon as 20 million people are watching it live, they go up. Their performance goes the other way. They get better. And he's one of those. He just connects.
Wow.
It's actually a real thing to witness, that it's one thing to be a performer. There's a certain quality that like a pop star has that might not even be like technical, that when there's a bunch of people, this thing actually, you can see it happening. And it's a thing to behold. Anyway, he goes, oh yeah, so I'm doing this thing at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. It was a I remember meeting Tiger Woods. It was some charity thing and it was Christina Aguilera. She had this massive show with like fireworks and dancing, and it was great. We had this really stripped down thing. It was just me, Seal, and this awesome guitarist called Gus Isidore. It's a really good mate of his. And we were the opposite. It was like Seal was going to sing, play guitar. Gus was going to play guitar. I'd play the piano. Anyway, and he goes, hey, so do you want to do this thing live? I was like, not in a million years. Let me carry on working on the amp. Like, so I want to stay in the lab. I don't want to go. There must be so many awesome band keyboard players that you work with. Just ring one of those guys. Well, I can carry on working. And to his great credit, he goes, yeah, no, I'll do that as long as you admit, you're chicken shit. And I was like, what? He's like, well, look, Henry, the way I look at it, because I'm classically trained and everything. He goes, Henry, you can play like Rachmaninoff or like Brahms Rhapsodies. Are you telling me you can't play Kiss from Rose? And he goes, I bet you, if we just went to the piano now without music and you haven't worked on that song, I bet you could just like play your way through Kiss from Rose, and I bet you we could just do it right now. And so we went to the piano, did. He goes, yeah, you haven't even got the music yet, and we just nailed it. So like, why? What's the big deal? Like, why can't? And I'm like, well, it's like a huge thing. It's live. It's on TV. We come on after Christina Aguilera's. There's the whole like in-ear thing, which I'm not, familiar with. Anyway, he worked on me, and eventually I said yes. And I remember being on this private jet. I think it was his manager's private jet. And I was like, oh, no, this is cool. Seal's right. This is going to be fine. And I think when we got to like the huge auditorium, I suddenly had this like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I had a sort of moment of like, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to walk out of the hotel, get a cab, just go to the airport, ring him, go, dude, just get one of your bang, I'm out of here. I suddenly had to like, what was I thinking? This is going to be like live on TV. I'm not a professional, performing, stage performer. And he was totally relaxed about it, and it went fine. It was actually a really cool experience, and he sang great, and I really learned something that night because I was so nervous beforehand. And then I realized when we walked out and he just had this energy of connecting with everyone, I suddenly had this thing that you don't really get in classical music. Like, wait a minute, these people have all come here because they love him. No one's here to go, Jackman, let me inspect your piano fingering to make sure it's not, people are here to have a good time.
Right. Right.
As soon as you hear about 6 people in the front row go, we love you, Seal. You're like, look, people are here to have a good time. Just relax and play the piano. That's what we're here to do. It's not like some hideous interrogation from the Federal Bureau of like piano investigation. It's fun,
Yeah.
And I think I met Joe Pesci. I met him was he in the Green or something? He managed to say something that put me at ease. I can't remember. It's so long ago. was it that it might have been that I noticed he was nervous, and I was like, well, hang on, if Joe Pesci's a bit, because he was doing some kind of introduction,
right?
And I noticed he was a bit nervous. I'm like, my God, if Joe Pesci's a bit nervous, then or like, you know, green room agitation or whatever. I might have got that story wrong. I can't. There was some incident. There were so many little moments. I remember meeting Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis in the lift. Like total legends. They, you know, if you only have to look those guys up, they're just like totally legendary record producers. And me and Seal were in the lift, the doors open, and it's like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis walking up.
You're like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, this is just full on. I mean, they produced like Rhythm Nation, Janet Jackson. There was one moment, I wish I could tell this story properly, because I'm so obsessed by, you know, soccer, coming from you know, UK background.
Yeah.
To me, the ultimate moment would be like Ronaldo, Messi, and Raul are like all at the bar, and with like Zidane, and I would just lose it. There was a moment with Charles Barkley, who also I do know, and Tiger Woods, and these two other dudes who I wish and Seal was like, Jackman, you have no idea what's happening right now. I'm like, dude, of course I do. It's like Tiger Woods, Charles Barkley. I'm not a complete idiot, you know, even though I'm more familiar with soccer. And the two other guys were like total legends. One of baseball, one of he's like, you have no idea. Between these four people, you just have no idea. What's he good? And I wish I could remember the names. And then it's like it's the equivalent of Lionel Messi, Ronaldo, you know, Zidane, but actually those guys weren't that big in 2001. But my point being, I couldn't get the full magnitude of it because two of the legends weren't that well known to me because they were like baseball guys.
Okay.
So anyway, I've got him to thank for that whole experience, meeting all these interesting people, and not the least of which the realization of like performing live isn't always a total trauma.
Right.
And if it's not some Brahms G minor Rhapsody with a very quiet classical audience where you know you can hear a pin drop, there's another type of performance where everyone's there to enjoy themselves and they're there willing you on to do well. And I've never forgotten that. I mean, I'm still the same personality. I'm a bit shy, and I'd rather, you know, write the music and put it in the movie and not be in the spotlight. And that's the very specific talent Seal has to be in the spotlight. He's a brilliant performer. But I'm very grateful for that experience because it sort of slightly took the edge off my total desire to avoid any sort of
right. Well, that's sort of what I was going to ask you, is that it was like, do you ever think you could do a show like Hans or like
no, because I think I'm not sure because they've I don't know too much about Brian Tyler, but Hans I think shares that slightly populist. I'm not saying I'm a snobby elitist person, but I'm saying, which I'm not, but I'm saying that Hans Zimmer and Seal, it's a particular. I remember going to Coachella and seeing Hans, and he did a show, and how he was relaxed and enjoying himself and interacting with it. I think it's not something to take lightly, you know. I think imagine me going, oh, suspension bridge, yeah, I can design one of those. That's no big deal, right? It's just like steel, you kind of slam it together, right? No, you need to be an engineer, right? We all know to respect that skill. And I think pulling off being at the front of something is actually a talent. And, you know, I'm sort of pretty articulate. I'm vaguely interesting, but I don't think it's the same thing. I think it's a specific, whenever there's a spotlight, I'm just sort of figuring out how to get someone into it and get me like just off the spotlight. So I don't know. I mean, it might be possible one day for there to be some sort of show, but I don't know whether I've got that skill set that I see in someone like Hans of the unaffected desire to connect in that sort of popular, like with a crowd, meaning I'm comfortable in this kind of a situation. It's still, you know, when you have like a mass of people, that's no longer like, you can't know each one of them that you're talking to. It's now a slightly energetic thing between you and like a mass.
Right.
That's actually a weird skill where you have the ability to sort of somehow get a connection, which is why, you know, just look at all the best front men and front women and it's like sometimes the front. I mean, look at Liam Gallagher, right? Right.
I don't think Liam Gallagher is going to be winning any awards for the
technically most perfect way of singing, right?
Yeah.
But you know, I'm not saying he's a bad singer or anything, but it's not like he's got the most trained voice or anything. It's not like, but he is the ultimate, like, I mean, in terms of Oasis, the sheer level of whatever he was projecting is coming out like at superhero levels of, you know, like a Mancunian rock mojo serum. He's like,
yeah.
And you can't buy, that's not something you fake. He just had it. He just, whatever it is, he had it. You know what I mean? Now, I'm not saying you've got to be some kind of like rock legend like Liam Gallagher to pull off, you know, a show. But, you know, Danny Elfman's another good example. He used to be in a you know, Boingo, you know, with his background and whatnot. Yeah. I feel like he does a great job of all that. I don't know. Firstly, there's no denying that if you tried to put together like a Jackman show, nowhere near get the sort of tickets that, you know, I mean, Hans is like past film, you know, Hans is sort of like a Black Swan event, you know what I mean?
Right.
He's not only is he a massive composer, he's sort of like a game-changing influence on film music. You know, he's absolutely huge. So it certainly wouldn't be, you know, the kind of interest. But I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I don't know whether there'd be sufficient interest, and I don't know if I'd be able to make it interesting enough for people, because I think people want more than just like, oh, let's listen to some music, you know.
Right.
Some kind of you know, I'd have to dig around for my inner Liam Gallagher and perhaps find that it's
well, listen, and then
not quite there.
Right. But like, if it ever happened, you know, incorporate the Russos in some capacity, like,
yeah,
you know,
that would be.
Like,
I'd rather do it. Yeah, if it was sort of collaborative, and that's what I'm saying. My instinct is to take the heat off the onus being, or that's why, you know, in the whole history of the world, I always find it crazy that people want to be dictators, because you know, like, if you think of all the crazy dictators, I could not think of anything more stressful and annoying than having to like be in charge of everything and everyone. It's like so arrogant and egotistical. It's just like, can't we like delegate and get some of this? Like, I don't want to conquer. If I conquered a new country, I've just got like more headaches and more like pension problems and like more economic problems and more like rebellions to crush. Like, get other people in the mix, you know?
Yeah.
Not that I fantasize about being a dictator, but it's always struck me as like weirdly egotistical. If it was something where it's like, okay, so, you know, we do some Marvel stuff and hey, guess what? We've got Joe and Anthony here, you know, it could become a bit of a thing where, you know, I don't have some spotlight on me, and it's sort of more, you build some story out of the collaborations. That could be appealing, and I wouldn't have to crap myself so much.
Yeah, well, I guess. Hey, listen, maybe you could even rope Seal into doing something, right? Yeah. Like, maybe you come out, you play.
Hey, maybe we could sing a song from Togetherland. You know,
there
like,
you go.
He might agree to do that because it would be like, well, I suppose people could record it, couldn't they? We'd have to do like a Marvel thing where we jam all the iPhones and no one can record it. You know?
Right, that's so true. Awesome. Well, listen, Henry, I've taken up enough of your time. I really appreciate you chatting with me.
Hey, if you ever find out, I don't know what sort of interviews you do. If you ever do find out, like, if or you talk to anyone who's hanging out with Seal or whatnot, if you ever do find out the answer to whether he just hates that album, never wants to hear it, let me know, because I actually don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, that'll be one of the quests that I'm on here. It's just sort of like figuring out what happened to that, because I was even unaware of it really until my colleague brought it up to me, and he was like, oh yeah, it's like this, just, you know, this mythic thing that just like never happened, and like,
well, the only
Henry
thing
Jackman
I would say,
involved.
the funny, I mean, it's good, but it's probably become, you know, when like something is never revealed, it can then start to take on like, oh, it was like, if you can't hear it and you can't see it, it must be the greatest, you know, it's like the holy grail, you know. It probably isn't. It's probably taken on a bit more of a shine by dint of its total absence.
Yeah, right. Well, that's true. I mean, it's always, some of this stuff is often like better left as just like mythic or whatever.
So he's probably a lot wiser than I. But yeah, if ever you got permission or you found out it's cool, I could probably find some of that. God knows where it is, but I probably got versions of them lying around somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, again, if that ever happens, I'd love to just like hear some of it, because again, you know, just the nature of it, the experimentation. I mean,
well, because not everything's perfect. I'm not, no disrespect to. I think you know, it's a universally acknowledged thing that the third Alien movie is fascinating and interesting and has really cool things about it, but isn't quite the finished perfect article. Because it was like, how old? I mean, David Fincher was 29, absolutely amazing, even to go, and you can feel his artistic genius in there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You can also feel the conflict of like having to meet the Fox, you know, and if you read about the making of that film, it was
disaster.
It was a total disaster. But having said that, it's still worth watching Alien 3. Not because you can go, watch this film because it is a perfect example of a completely nailed film in which, you know, the structure and the characterization. Okay, no, it doesn't quite. It's a little unhinged, and in the third act, it sort of swivels away from this other kind of a film that it's been. But there is so much to enjoy in there, just because something had a painful birth and may not have been quite, you know, what would have happened if you know, imagine David Fincher was like 45 when he did it.
Yeah.
And, you know, left alone, and there wasn't the creative conflict. Okay, but it wasn't that, right? So we have what we have. There's all kinds of like fascinating and beautiful and interesting things about that third Alien, and not least of which, by the way, the ridiculously good score by Elliot Goldenthal.
Oh, I know. It's excellent. It's
beautiful,
great,
and it's dark, and it's beautiful, and it's got all these interesting themes of like convicts finding religion, and I won't get into it, but just because something isn't like a perfect crystal and it has some flaws in it, I love watching movies like that where, you know, the critics thing is like, you know, it's like a 68%, or it's, you know, it's like ultimately flawed movie with interesting ideas, you know, like I wouldn't pass up on watching even a David Fincher experience where he didn't quite get to do what he might have done, because you're still going to get 68.5% of his genius in there somewhere. So
yeah, I mean, and you also discover just sort of like the building blocks of like what made him who he is. You know, like there is something just so fascinating about that, going back and watching those sort of like imperfect movies, but you're still able to see like their voice, like, okay, this is what they were doing at a young age, you know?
And it's an amazing, I think he was not even 30. When you consider his age, it just shows you the level of natural gift that these people have, like someone like David Fincher. There's just a level of like inherent, it's a bit like the infinity crystals or something, you know what I mean? Because I was doing some pretty cool stuff when I was 29. What I was not doing was being handed the highest budget for any sequel in the history of like whatever. And having to deal, so not only did he have his creativity, you know, he's having to deal with over the politics of the stressful situation, trying to get the movie made, to emerge with anything that isn't just complete crap.
Yeah.
It's a miracle, but to emerge with something that has all these fascinating and really profound subject matter, and it's really interesting. I love the whole beat. That, you know, I'm just gonna riff on something for 5 minutes.
Oh no, go for it.
Yeah, and it's going to sound a bit pretentious and a bit sort of philosophical, and I don't know whether it's intentional. I could be reading too much into it. In the first Alien film that Ridley Scott, which is, you know, another total masterpiece. I've probably seen that film over 40 times. To my embarrassment. There is a scene in that movie where, is it after John Hurt? Is it John Hurt, the first one to die, when the creature explodes out of his
I think yeah.
Right, so
John
he's
Hurt,
the first to go. We haven't had full carnage yet. It's like, oh well, this strange thing, you know, came out of him, but I think, you know, they killed that one. So at that point they're thinking they're all right. Anyway, there's the scene where they're about to the body's about to be chucked out of the escape chute into deep space. Yeah. Now, you know, none of them are religious, and you know, they're all like secular professionals, right? Who I can't, you know, it's like a mining shit, whatever. And they got that signal, which is why they had to go and investigate, right? So the point being, I'm waffling for too long, but the point being, the captain was like, does anyone want to say anything? They're about to shoot a body out into space, right? So even in our very secular world, you know, we're used to, you know, even if you're not a Christian, people get buried. There's a religious service, there's a priest. It's important for human beings to do something anthropologically meaningful. It feels weird just to like bung a body into space. You know, someone should say something, even it's okay, we're not necessarily Christian, but as human beings, it feels suspect that we can't, you know, even elephants do some weird, you know, when an elephant dies, they kind of get agitated and push the body around. Yeah. Right. So I think it's a deliberate filmmaking moment that he goes, does anyone want to say anything? There is a silence that is at least 5-6 seconds long. So that's why I think it's a deliberate filmmaking beat. Nobody says anything. And then the button is pushed, bosh, out it goes into space. And I may be reading like way too much into it, but it's this weird, bleak moment of, for all the technology, for all this incredible Nostromo ship and everything that it can do, and all their like life-preserving machines while they spend ages getting out into space that keeps all their vital organs going and everything. When the moment of human compassion is required, where any kind of ritualistic, anthropologically connecting moment to signify the death of a fellow human being is needed, there's a bleak, empty nothingness. No one says anything, and the body is shot out into the infinity of space. And it's this slightly weird, chilling, philosophical moment to me of sort of like, has no one got anything? Is there no...
I know.
Right. And so I think it's an interesting... And they were all like either working class or like officer class non-criminals, right? So cut to Alien 3. We've now got a bunch of rapists, murderers, hideously aggressive, seriously dangerous people who are going to live out their life in the infinity of space in this, sort of weird prison. And they have got a strict, almost monastical religious order that they created for themselves. And it's this really weird A-B where the so-called free, educated middle class and working class characters couldn't even string together a sentence for the death of their colleague in this sort of philosophical religious wasteland. Right. And the rapists and the murderers have got, I can't remember the character's name, the big black dude who's almost like a priest. He's got, it's such a weird conflict because on the one hand, their history, they're murderers and they're rapists. But that guy who is sort of the leader of this sort of semi-religious clan has a moral fiber to it. And he is concerned for the spiritual well-being of his fellow prisoners. And there's an order to things. And it's not like an autocratic, hideous, Stalinistic order. It's got a brotherhood to it, like a monastic sort of religion. And it's a combination of like, we've got to keep this religion or shit's just going to fall apart. I think it's an interesting mirror of, I liked how the rapists and the criminals are the ones who ended up with this moral code, and it was the professionals on the Nostromo who couldn't even put a sentence together in the sort of philosophical bleakness of not knowing what to do in the face of death.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because it's like, it's the people who are looking for salvation that obviously gravitate more towards it because they're in prison, they're on death row, all that stuff like that. And it's the people who they haven't done anything wrong and they don't, have any reason to. But it is like sort of this fascinating like dichotomy between the two of them. Yeah.
And I just wonder in the writing, you make a really good point. Obviously, in the face of a crisis as severe as you've been condemned by society, and you've got to think about what you've done. And not only that, you've got to think about what you've done floating around in the infinite recess of space where, that's where you're going to live out your days, is going to lead to some slightly more serious thinking than, am I going to get a pay raise if we do or don't investigate this egg that we found
right
on another planet. True, But I just wonder in the writing if there was any deliberate mirroring. And I wonder if I have read too much into it. I for people who are thoughtful about movies, I'd be interested to know in that scene in Alien whether people feel like it's just, I'm reading too much into it and it's just a lovely visual shot of a body going out into space. Because why choose to have in the dialogue the line, does anyone want to say anything? And then why hang for that long with no one saying anything? I'd love to know if other people think, because it's such an important movie, and I wonder if that is a deliberate beat to denote that no one quite knows.
Well, I almost wonder if it's also part of the fact that their entire belief system is just being questioned because of what happened, like the alien, like this thing that's like not supposed to exist, right? And like, just with that sort of like in tandem with like the I guess Judeo-Christian ideology.
That's an interesting point. Meaning the sort of the traditional niceties that some of them one of them might have been able to like string together the Lord's Prayer or like, I don't know, something. It suddenly seemed like weak fare in the face of, newly discovered exploding organisms.
If you ever do work with Ridley Scott or meet Ridley Scott,
I should ask Harry Harry Gregson
yeah.
Williams. I know
Yeah.
I know him well. He's a great guy, and he works with Ridley. I'll have to ask. Harry will be like, "Oh, I haven't got time for that. I've got to write music. I can't be sucked into these endless philosophical debates." But it's the sort of thing that I'm sure Ridley Scott would wax lyrical about. I mean, he's a profoundly
oh my god, yeah. I mean, just
person.
Yeah, I mean, just look at like his Alien prequels, right? Like that's I don't know. To me, that's I don't know if they're gonna make a third one, but that's sort of the direction that I love where the franchise was going. I was like, okay, this is really fascinating, and it also like you are able to tie into that first Alien movie really, really well in a way that doesn't, I guess, like undermine sort of what happened there, but sort of just like adds to the overall mythology.
It's the biggest thing you have to keep remembering about Alien was it was made before the 80s. I mean, it's just mad. It's just crazy how good. Anyway, I've prattled on for way.
Oh no, you good. I
bored the hell out. It's like, why is he banging on about?
If anything, I enjoyed this. This is what I enjoy talking about. So no, I get it. But listen, I can't thank you for your time again. If I do ever, for whatever reason, come talk to Seal or anyone who knows anything about not Transfigurate, or it is Transfigurate. No, that's your album, Togetherland.
Togetherland.
Togetherland. I'll definitely have to let you know about that for sure.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Have a great one.
See ya.
See ya.